My name's Charles Penwell, and Oliver Haydorn and myself are going to address ourselves to a concept of universal basic income and to whether it constitutes a long-term threat to personal freedoms. And we've attempted to equip ourselves in understanding what universal basic income is. Both of us attended, in 2018, we attended the main world conference of universal basic income called BIG, Basic Income Guarantee. And again, we attended the same conference in New York in 2019. And we addressed groups there, we discussed the matter, and we've equipped ourselves to know what we're talking about. Today we're raising questions about it, which are not hitherto raised. The main reason we're doing that is that from many quarters we're getting the information that artificial intelligence is now anticipating eliminating so many jobs that many prominent authorities are saying we're going to have to introduce universal basic income. Now, I think it's true we're going to have to do something about people's income. We're not objecting to that. But what we're saying is it has to be done in a certain way. If it's done in the wrong way, it can undo a lot of the good that's there potentially.
We might start off just with an introduction to what this is exactly. This is some people that maybe are not familiar with it or haven't had a chance to learn about it. And it's something that admits of a variety of different interpretations and applications, but basically the idea is that everyone, whether they're employed or not, will be given a certain amount of income by the government or by some state body on a regular basis. And the intention, I think, is that it would be sufficiently high to guarantee that their basic costs of living would be met. So that's the essential concept of a universal basic income. Now, our concerns about it center on, to begin with, the question of how are you going to finance it, because it can be financed in ways which don't actually make us better off, don't make the society or the economy as a whole better off, or it can be financed in ways that actually constitute genuine progress. And so, unfortunately, most of the academics, politicians, pundits that talk about universal basic income, they're thinking of it purely in terms of conventional finance. So in order to fund the program, you would have to either source the money through taxation, or you'd have to source it through an increase in public indebtedness. And so if you look at taxation first, a lot of the supporters for universal basic income say, well, if we use the existing taxation system, however we might tweak it to fund it, we might be able to save money by getting rid of other, let's say, social programs that are no longer required. They might become redundant or be replaced by universal basic income. But I would argue that at the end of the day, it's just redistribution. You're just taking basically from some segments of the population who have to those who have not, because some people will be net beneficiaries of the program and others will be net losers, essentially.
The two big problems with doing it through tax. One is, if you're doing it through the universal basic income recipients, you're giving it with one hand and you're taking it back with the other, and you're achieving absolutely nothing. It's a waste of time. You're just making administrative mischief out of the whole thing. Another option is to tax the employed. Now, some people are saying, and they may be right, that ultimately half of the population will be replaced in employment through artificial intelligence. And just to take that as an exaggerated situation perhaps for the moment, if we're going to tax the employed, then the employed are going to have to get two basic incomes. One to pay the tax to the other person that needs it, and one to retain it for himself. So that makes employment very expensive. And what that means is every employer will be racking their brains how they stop employing so many. It more or less subsidises, compels, certainly encourages unemployment and exacerbates it. So, taking the tax off the recipients makes no sense. Taking it off those that are going to pay all the tax out of their incomes doesn't make a lot of sense either.
Well, it incentivizes more automation, more artificial intelligence.
It incentivises
Yes,
eliminating
there'll
employment.
be fewer people available who are employed to be
That's
taxed.
right.
And so,
And there's not many other options when you get to tax. You could tax, say, industry, you could tax the self-employed, you could tax business and industry. Okay, fine. But how would they pay that tax? They pay their taxes by increasing prices. So what they're going to have to do is increase their prices, which will flow into consumer goods, to pay the tax. Who pays the price of consumption and consumer goods? It's going to be, you guessed it, in the main, the recipients. So it's a bit of a zero-sum game, this business of paying it out of tax. Now, it's a bit the same if you say, all right, well, we'll pay it out of tax. But that means you don't have to pay it just now, but later on you've got to pay it in full, and you've got to pay interest as well. So really, that could lead us into a situation where the whole world, if you like, is totally meshed in debt. They can't stop running more and more into debt because there's no other way to finance people just to have a basic income.
Yes, and of course.
So then we're enslaved to the debt masters.
Yes, and debt has to be serviced. So this ties in with the other video that we did today about inflation.
Yeah.
Where if we try to fund it through debt, ever increasing debt, and the debt has to be serviced, taxes will have to go up to cover it, and so on and so forth. And in that way, UBI would actually be inflationary.
That's right. We'd have more taxes, more debt, and more inflation. We'd sort of be enslaved to those things unless they're addressed. So we're here today to try to make a few suggestions about handling this in a different way.
We're not at all opposed to the concept of people getting an income that's somehow delinked from employment status, delinked from work.
Certainly not.
We're not philosophically opposed to that. And from a more practical standpoint, we recognize that the economy, given the way that it's structured, given the way that it functions, both the economy and the citizens require an income that's delinked from work. Right? So that basic principle, or that aspect of it, we don't have any objection to. It's just a question of how is it going to work in practice. So we have this major issue with the funding, and what we want to suggest is that as an alternative to conventional means of finance, taxation, or increasing the public debt, it is possible to conceive of a change, let's say, in national accounting, whereby we could give everyone something like a basic income, but do it with a change in how money is created. So instead of creating it as a debt, as a repayable credit, we actually could create credit that is not linked to a debt, doesn't have to be repaid, and the economy actually needs that input of a debt-free volume of money. And this would not be inflationary. It would be anti-inflationary. We can explain that perhaps a little later. And it wouldn't have the drawbacks that we've just been looking at in case of taxation and in case of...
Money can be created pretty much in the same way as that we create ballots when election time comes. We can create enough so we all get one each. We could create money if we set up a national credit authority. We've got electoral offices, national electoral offices. When we set up a national credit authority, they could make calculations about what's necessary in terms of basic income, or as we prefer to call it, a national dividend. And once that's known, they could be empowered to issue credit, not as debt, and not owing to anybody. Of course, it will make demands on the economy, and in that general sense, it's a liability on the economy, but it's not a repayable liability that has to be added into cost later. So that's basically the suggestion. We need to rethink the thing, fund it in a different way that doesn't tax the recipients, which doesn't make any sense, tax the employed, which disincentives employment, or add to debt internally And once you head down that road of increasing debt as the only way to do this, then there's nowhere to go except to continue that through years, through decades, and necessarily through centuries, until, you know, whoever is the mortgagees will really run the world unashamedly, and there'll be nothing we can do about it except comply and go back and ask for more. And if they don't give it to us, well, our goose is cooked. You know, and that's not a place to be. We need to be in command. We need to be in command of our own credit, and that's what we're proposing. Special National Credit Authority with court-like powers. It would have to be structured constitutionally, so that it can't get out of control. And there's a few things like that. But if we're going to have a universal basic income, we've got to address at that level, or we're going to end up perhaps worse off than we are now.
Right. So we have a situation where artificial intelligence, automation are displacing people from work. People are losing their jobs. We anticipate that a lot of people, their jobs will be replaced, you know, not in the too far distant future. And obviously we need to have a way of providing for those people so that they retain access to goods and services, even though their labor is no longer required by the formal economy. But we have to be very careful to make sure that in doing that, we are actually protecting people's civil rights, we're protecting their freedom, we're enhancing their freedom, and we're not creating a situation where, because they don't have employment or don't have self-employment, that you know, maybe through the way we finance it, we're not actually setting up a kind of slavery system where the society as a whole becomes, you know, is in pawn to financiers, for example, because
at every level, like individually, we're debt slaves, and government itself is a debt slave unless they can set up right institutions to handle this thing properly. I mean, kings of old used to coin the money. Now, coins aren't money; no, bank deposits are money. But even then, the notes and coins that are made are sold to the banks at very moderate rates, and in the most part, minting money, the mints lose money. They lose money many years. So the old kings used to create the money, but that's done by a banking system now, and it's done in cyberspace. And we got to if we can do it in cyberspace, it's cheap to do, but we've got to look at who has the sanctions, who has the control over that, who imposes the limitations and the conditions. And unless we'll address that, we get ourselves in a big mess here.
Yes, one of the assumptions of, let's say, orthodox finance, conventional finance, which is shared by UBI proponents, is the assumption that whatever costs and prices are built up in the economy in the course of production, that there's automatically a sufficient amount of consumer income that's being distributed as wages, salaries, dividends to offset the costs and prices. These things are sort of automatically in balance. And what we are suggesting is that actually that is not the case.
It is not the case.
There is a gap between the rate at which costs and prices are built up in the economy versus the rate at which incomes are automatically distributed from the same productive processes. And the existing system generally fills that gap with more and more debt.
That's right.
But if we recognize that what that actually means on a physical level, if we're producing so much in value in terms of goods and services per annum, and we're only being paid a lesser amount automatically to produce it, then that means that society is actually making a profit, right? We're making more with less, and so.
But it can't afford to buy its profit.
But it can't afford to buy its profit under the existing setup, the existing system.
That's right.
What we're proposing is actually, if you change the institutions and the mechanism of money, you can actually monetize the gap with debt-free credit and distribute that as a dividend. And it's called a dividend because the whole point is, from our philosophical point of view, the citizens should be regarded as shareholders, as proprietors. And so this way of financing a basic income would actually be built on the idea that we don't go to the state or the government as beggars, as, you know, something must be done because we don't have employment, but rather the economy is something we own. And so it's in a matter of justice.
We're the proprietors of this country, and therefore, if there is a profit, who does it belong to? It belongs to the people. We're all shareholders with one share at par value, so everybody, irrespective of all other considerations, gets one share. And the reason this is terribly necessary is that incomes and costs are created at the same time. If somebody's employed to create a mine, income's there, but the cost flows through into the metal and into the machine and so on. And eventually maybe you get a can of baked beans out of that. But that was 5 years ago, that the cost of the mine. It might be 10 years or more. So the cost and the income are created at the same time. But if you take your income and you pay off your house mortgage, that deposit disappears. So incomes disappear at a rate much faster than costs. Costs will go on until a consumer consumes a consumer product and cannot pass the cost on for that reason. He eats the baked beans and that's it.
Yeah.
But the incomes are gone before the baked beans hit the market. So that's a simple way of saying it, but you've just got to address that. That's the reason, ultimately, why we need a universal basic income, because we've just got to have it. The reason we need it is that we are really profitable. We're only spending a certain amount in income to produce a lot more in terms of consumer goods. And it's a dynamic thing, but unless we address it, we're in deep trouble. And unless we address it in the right way, without going into debt and exacerbating it, then we're not going to come out of this.
Yes.
And we really, well, you can't even apologise for the fact that this is a bit difficult to understand. Society doesn't have an alternative to understand this. If we don't address it, we're either going to harbour in, starve in the hedgerows, or be enslaved in indebted societies with indebted governments, indebted persons, indebted industry, more or less forever, with no option to come out of that.
Yes, and closely connected with that sort of financial pressure, financial situation, is the concern that many people have voiced that if a lot of people, 50% of the population, no longer have the opportunity of working for a living, and so they're dependent on this thing for their survival. If there's no real recognition, either in theory or in practice, that people are owed this as a matter of justice, just as being citizens and shareholders in their economy, that the government may believe that it has the right to put conditions on the receipt of the basic income that people depend on for survival.
That's total slavery.
And that's total slavery. So they might say, for example, well, yes, we'll give you a basic income, but you've got to do A, B, C, or not do D, E, and F in order to get it. And then they use that as a control mechanism. And that, of course, is...
Yeah, once employment is gone, it's got to be substituted with something. And Elon Musk reckons that it's coming in big time. He's been working on automating motor vehicles, and what they're saying in his presentations, in his videos, is that this has reached such a point, they've had to learn so much about automating production and processes that unemployment is coming at very high levels. So it's an issue of the time. We're going to have to confront it, and we can get it wrong in many ways. We can't surrender freedom in order to escape starvation. We've got to escape starvation, certainly.
Yeah.
But if we surrender freedom, then that really is the end of the organism. Really, it's just an automation after that that's played like a piano by the debt manipulators, and that's hell, and probably not in a basket. So we've got to get our head around the institutions we need, national credit authorities, creating credit on the basis they can only distribute to the shareholders of the country, which are the citizens, and there's more to that for another day. But that's how it has to be hit.
So a national dividend financed through the introduction of debt-free credit, distributed as an unconditional right, is the direction we should be moving in.
That's right. Yeah. And it's not that basic, not really different to a basic income, except in how it's done, and except of the fallout, the implications to society and its freedom orientation. So we're doing the same thing, but we want to do it on different terms.